Welcome to the Same Day Podcast, where we discuss driving incremental business growth and other topics related to real estate, property management, and entrepreneurship. Now to the show at hand.
Matt Zolk here. I'm the host of the Same Day Podcast, where I connect with top business leaders and real estate experts. Past guests include Jay Connor talking about raising private money, and Darren Huang, who owns 100 units under management and a host of industrial properties. Today's episode is brought to you by Chris Lyle State Farm. Chris Lyle State Farm helps you protect your most precious assets and investments, whether it's your home and auto, investment, rental properties, or other valuables. Call Chris Lyle's State Farm for a quick and painless phone call to potentially save you double digits on all of your insurance needs. Visit diallyle, diallyle.com, or call his office at 918-878-7771. Today's episode is also brought to you by Keyrenter Property Management. Keyrenter Property Management is a full-service property management company helping our clients buy, renovate, and operate real estate assets. We help our clients build wealth while taking the headache out of property management. No matter what rental you have, single-family homes, condos, townhomes, we have the management solutions you need. Go to keyrenterpmc.com or info@keyrenterpmc.com if you want to email us. Today's guests are three in number. Hannah Shelburne is Business Development Manager for Keyrenter Northwest Arkansas. Steve Howard is the Business Development Manager for Keyrenter Wichita. And Yonatan Schmidt is the Head of Marketing and Sales for Keyrenter Property Management. Hannah Shelburne, Steve Howard, Yoni, Schmidt. Happy to have you guys on the show. How are you?
Doing
Great.
well.
Doing well.
Today, we're talking about short-term rentals versus long-term rentals for the real estate investor. In this panel, the four of us, we've got a ton of experience doing both. I've managed short-term rentals, both my own and others, in the past. I can speak to how much of a pain it is. Hannah, you actively currently manage short-term rentals, and you are the BDM, the Business Development Manager for the Arkansas region. So you have a ton of experience doing both short-term and long-term rental. And we're getting a bunch of leads for both clients that want to discuss the differences between short-term rentals and long-term rentals. That is the revenue possibility, the bottom line, how intensive management is, the pros and cons along a bunch of different, aspects of those two types. And Steve, I know you've got some experience doing both also in the Wichita market. Yoni, I'm not really sure why you're here, but I love that you're here. So I'm hoping that you add some serious value to our listeners.
Thank you. I've been doing short-term rentals for a very long time. My first investment property was short-term and still.
Okay. You can add some value.
For a short.
You're a seasoned and regular guest on the Same Day Podcast, so we're happy to have you. Hannah, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and maybe some of the differences between the management of short-term rentals and long-term rentals.
Yeah. In the Northwest Arkansas market specifically, when it comes to short-term, I'm seeing a lot of listings come on the market. I think most of those listings were acquired within the past 18 months. And so maybe there might not have been a ton of strategy or thought process on placement within that. So they're offboarding because it just didn't make sense to have it as an STR in the first place and never was profitable. Then just kind of like in the management aspect, I think it's a level of there's more engagement on the front end, a lot of questions, a lot of answering all of those aspects for those guests and those inquiries and just being really on top of that. I work really diligently to make sure everything is automated or as automated as possible. My entire company runs on 92% automation, and I'm really proud of that because it means I only have to really be there 8% of the time because it can anticipate most every question. I think in just like kind of looking at that short-term versus long-term and thinking through whether it's a good decision, you have to weigh a lot of different perspectives, and risk tolerance is probably one of the biggest aspects to consider. If you have a really low risk tolerance or you don't have room to cover vacant months, then you probably shouldn't pursue short term. But maybe you have some really a lot of liquid that you need to diversify and utilize that. It can be a strategy that works really great. But I think location and seasonality plays a huge factor that people don't necessarily pay attention to.
What has caused the proliferation of short-term rentals in Northwest Arkansas? You say 18 people have acquired them in the last 18 months, and maybe they're not doing that well. But why did they believe that short-term rentals was a good strategy to begin with 18 months ago or whenever they bought them?
Yeah, I mean, I've been managing in Northwest Arkansas for over 13 years, so I understand those shifts and changes. I know in the past 2.5, 3 years, the mountain biking trend and everything that has been pushed into this area of the world, as far as my mountain biking is concerned, has just blown up and caused a lot of that tourist expectation. And so in that, I think that's why a lot have come online, and people, especially in Bella Vista and Bentonville, have really just like bought any kind of property and listed it as a short-term rental. Some of the areas that I'm mostly seeing those sales happening are in the Centerton and the like not really the most desirable areas of Bella Vista, and really removed areas of Bentonville. So out by the airport and things along those lines. Those locations just, they don't really make sense for the market that you'd actually want to target for. So that's kind of what I'm seeing, is it's more of the locations that probably never should have been listed as an STR in the first place.
There were a ton back in the original days of Airbnb. It was what I experienced was listings where people were literally just going to move out of their house for a week while I lived there, and they realized they could make a couple of extra bucks and cover like their entire month's mortgage with just, my rental for the week. And then it transitioned into people like doing it more professionally, taking their house and, staging it properly and doing it right. And then it transitioned into people buying investment homes solely for the purpose of making it an Airbnb. And we've seen the same thing with rental cars and Turo and a bunch of other stuff. But the downside of doing that, I guess, in terms of intensity of management, I mean, yours is automated, but the average person that just wants to do one of them, I want to understand the intensity of management. And I also want to understand some of the ways that people try to cut corners and ultimately are not successful. So like being in the outskirts of Bella Vista or the outskirts of Bentonville, and just thinking, like, I don't really need to decorate that well. I can just put up a sign that says opportunities missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and looks like work. And then think I've got a great Airbnb, and people come in and go, this is not, 2015 when people just rented out their homes and you could leave your toothbrushes in the corner. This is now like a hotel. So I want to understand both the management intensity, kind of some keys there, and also where people are failing, why they're not being successful apart from geography. Because I suspect that you can, you could put a yurt in the middle of Utah and people will seek it out as an adventure place if it's done right. But if you put a yurt in the outskirts of Bentonville and it's done poorly, it won't. So maybe you can speak to those a little bit.
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as the intensity of management, it is more ongoing than it is in the long term. So every single time a guest books, there is a coordination of that clean, that turn of the property, and making sure that everything top to bottom is not only restaged, but it's completely clean. Yeah. It's free of the hair and all of those processes, because the goal is to really have that guest walk in and feel like they're the first guest who's ever stepped into that property. The lawn care is also ongoing, and it's just a constant process. In the short term, you have your utilities. So if anything were to ever go wrong in that aspect, then you have to make sure that you can mitigate that and make sure that it stays on top. I think the biggest aspect of the management is maintaining the cleanliness of the home, the yard being maintained, and then the restocking aspect. And that's a due diligence, and it's a constant having eyes on there, checking on that process. So, I mean, in my company's rhythm, it's my cleaners come, they turn the property, and then someone on my team shows up and does a visual inspection to verify that everything has actually been staged appropriately and that no cleaning aspect has been missed. And then we take an inventory of all of the items inside of the home and in the restocking cabinets to make sure that nothing was taken or stolen, or that nothing was damaged and my cleaners just didn't notice it because they're not there all the time or they don't have all the details. It's one of those where, just like in the long-term side, appliances go out, but in the STR world, it can, I think the guests feel like it's you have to fix this within the day. And so really just having those contacts and that ability to make those calls and get those technicians in there to resolve issues as soon as you possibly can. And knowing what you can do as a manager to either compensate that and help smooth over that guest experience, or what your owners are kind of allowing for you to do in that. So just keeping really good notes is another piece of, what leeway do I have within my owners and what agreements am I operating on? And so there's lots of moving parts in all of that.
Do you get the feeling that short-term renters are more abusive is the wrong word, but are more like intensively using the property? Like, would we have more? Is there a sense that when you get a rental car, you just slam on the gas, you slam on the brake, you slam on the gas, you slam on the brake, because this is just a rental car. Hertz will figure this out or whatever. And so do people treat an Airbnb the same way as opposed to being a long-term renter, and they just show more ownership of the property? Or is that not really the case? People don't actually do it. It's a higher end demographic.
The risk of an event taking place and there being some form of damages is higher in short term. My experience with guests, because my house rules and my rental agreements that they have in place and that I get signings for, I think really help me avoid those types of guests, because there's a lot of extra fees that they're going to get hit with if they do cause those damages or have those events. So as far as the wear and tear, it's higher traffic, and I think it's more the furnishings that actually get the wear down than the actual property and the real estate. The physical real damages to property, I have had zero of. It has been appliance related and furnishing related. So it's that deferred maintenance of the furnishings. You might have a stained pillowcase or a throw pillow. Okay. That's usually a pretty quick resolve. You might have a set of sheets that get stained. Like, those are typically what you see in a short-term rental as far as damages are concerned. And I think in it, there's a lot of strategies of how you can work as a company or as an individual to safeguard and actually collect either insurance policies on those guests so that if damages happen, you can immediately get payouts, or having additional fees in place. And then you just have to actually get the payment from those guests.
Yeah. Steve, I wanted to ask you about the pros and cons of long-term rentals versus short-term rentals in terms of the steadiness of cash flow. And I know kind of what Hannah was saying around these, the furnishings getting damaged. It reminds me that oftentimes we hear people do kind of back of the envelope or back of the napkin calculations, and they go, well, I'll get $300 a night. There are 30 nights in a month. That's $9,000 a month. I'll pay my management fee 20 or 25%. So take out $1,800. I've still got $7,000. Like, that's it. And they're going, great. And I just think, well, you've got utilities where people are not as concerned about whether they're pumping the heat to 90 degrees in winter or pumping the AC to 65 and leaving the house lights on, but also Cox cable and also the wear and tear on furnishings. What's your perspective on the cyclicality or steadiness of cash flow between short-term rental and long-term rental?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've seen this both ways as somebody that's managed the property, but also as a digital nomad for about 3 years and staying in properties myself all over the Southwest and Austin. Austin was actually a city that was an early adopter of Airbnb. Airbnb actually semi-launched in South by Southwest during the sharing economy. And it's exactly as you said, you were sharing a space with somebody, right? I think a lot of, one of the things that's important to remember is Airbnb spent a lot of money marketing the ability of people in the easy money era of the last couple of years to buy a second property or buy more properties and put them on the market. So they spent just as much money marketing to owners as they did to potential guests. And I've seen just anecdotally in a lot of our markets, but even in Wichita, especially, where people had the allure of, you get to decorate and you get to buy the signs and you get to buy the Keurig and you get to put the label maker on everything and the fun stuff, right? And then they forgot about the overall part, right? They forgot about the actual work part. And I think some of the interior design aspects kind of were off books, weren't really necessarily considered as part of the investment strategy. And then that note ends up coming due when Hannah says you've got a replacement cost, right? You got a fabric on a couch to clean. Long-term rental, you're not furnishing the house, right? You typically have an appliance cost that you look up front, you can amortize over time. But in a situation where you're really decorating it and putting all this stuff in there, I don't think a lot of people really thought about the replacement costs, especially those people like Hannah said that have come in the last 18 months. those costs start mounting and you're starting to scramble because, again, one of the attractions is that high nightly rates you can get with a short-term rental, because a lot of people have, just like you think you can plan a long-term rental based on the max rent, a lot of people planned around that max nightly stay, which, depending on their location, they may never get, right? And a lot of these problems crept in when Airbnb started really having platform problems, especially over the last year. So I think when you have a management service like Hannah, who can actually be on site and have a direct relationship, it's a little different than these platform dependent models where you're on Airbnb. You may not even be a localized owner, right? You may have just bought it, set it up, and thought you could forget it. And I think that's where a lot of people that I've seen come to us lately and say, how do I switch this to a long-term rental, or what should I do? Because now I'm underwater on the short-term rental. I think it was just a lot of people didn't think to book all those costs into their plan. Didn't really, they thought of the fun side of it, decorating, and they didn't think of the long term. It's not just appliances now, it's not just utilities now, it's everything, and I'm going to be responsible for it.
But Hannah, what would you say on average you spend to furnish, let's just call it a 3-bed, 2-bath house, as a startup cost going into making a property in Airbnb?
I mean, the rule of thumb in short-term industry is to equate 1% of your purchase price to your furnishings. So if you're 10%. So in that, if you're buying a $300,000 house, you should be able to furnish it with $30,000. Wow, words are hard.
That's a pretty significant investment. And then if it doesn't work out, now you're selling $30,000 worth of furnishings at 20 cents on the dollar, 30 cents on the dollar.
Or you got that trapped value in a place that you're trying to now sell or rent. And we have a lot of owners and investors coming to us and like, you rent this furnished? And the reality is you really not going to be able to. That's so annoying.
You're like, I'm going to go ahead and take inventory of every single item in the house, the plates and the sofas and the pillows, the throw pillows, the blankets. And then at the end of the lease, I'm also going to go back and ding the tenant for a stain on the sofa, a stain on the the throw pillow, and try to collect from a security deposit. That just doesn't make any sense at all.
And you're starting to see that on Zillow too, is you're seeing, in fact, this whole topic came up when Hannah and I started chatting a few months back about seeing these Zillow listings show up where it's impeccably furnished house. And I kind of call it the Keurig effect, right? If you see the Keurig machine in the kitchen with the full setup bar, it was a failed Airbnb experiment, right? And
it says welcome home with the custom signature.
Got the same Tuesday morning Art Deco theme, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you can tell because the square footage price isn't remotely in market, because they're trying to recapture this trapped value, and they're never going to be able to do it. And so an empty house selling at 200 square foot, they're trying to compete at 500 a square foot because they think it's just the most beautifully decorated thing ever. So I think that's where we're starting to have these conversations saying, if you're going to think about transferring short-term to long-term, maybe you have a viable short-term business and it just needs to be managed or optimized better, to Hannah's point. But if you're going to transition it, we really need to think about a different model for that and fitting it more into a long-term strategy. And I think that is going to be an opportunity for investors, either to take a property away from an owner who just didn't really have a foundational strategy in place to do that, or help somebody transition into more of a long-term game.
Yeah. In terms of just stability of cash flow, though, Hannah, are you seeing your best owners with consistent occupancy across months, or even are some of the best owners experiencing periods of vacancy in excess of 5 or 10% annually?
My best properties are in 85% occupancy category. So I'm really proud of that, because like industry, what your goal is in the 70s. So super proud that I have multiple owners in the 80% portion, but in it, there is still that ebb and flow of up and down in that process. My strategy and my company is in the slower seasons. We look for those more midterm guests, the 1, 2, 3 months. Travel professionals are who I target in all of my marketing strategies. And every single one of my properties has midterm guests in there in these slower months. So I'm like really proud of those processes and the ability to be able to make that happen. And I should clarify that all of my properties that my owners are willing to do midterm guests, that I have them that way. I have a few owners that only want short term, and they are absolutely fine with those like months that have complete vacancies or maybe 1 weekend booking. But that's reality is those properties are within 1 mile or a half a mile of the University of Arkansas, and the football, basketball, and other sporting seasons pay for their mortgage times. Let's see, my highest on one of my properties has been 7.5 times their mortgage in 1 weekend.
Wow.
Super proud of that. Super awesome to secure that. But it doesn't happen every weekend. And so, in those, they're able to weigh that like, okay, well, we might actually only be in the 40% occupancy, but when we're occupied, we are making 5-7 times of anything else we would ever anticipate. So it kind of evens out for them in their strategy.
So why not do short-term rental?
Why not?
Mm-hmm.
Why not do a short-term rental?
Yeah, I'm like ready. I'm bought. I'm sold. Let's do 7 times
location. I mean, I think one thing Heather brings up, right, is, and something Yoni always preaches, is location and placement, right? And I think if you've got that Eureka Springs, that Fayetteville, that Tulsa BOK Center, that Oklahoma City or whatever, but I've seen people try to do Airbnbs in Wichita in suburban cookie cutter neighborhoods, and that's just never going to work.
Yeah.
It's inconsistent. It's completely inconsistent. Your guests are, coming in when your team is winning, and they're booking when your team is winning. But I think if your team is losing, right, the Razorbacks aren't doing so great that season, less people are going to come to Fayetteville to stay at an Airbnb.
So only do Airbnbs in your colleges with winning teams.
Winning, I mean, that might work a lot better, but it's also probably inconsistent. You can't really model on, you can't really model on a team's ability to win or lose. A lot of these opportunities are sold on pro formas rather than on performance, which, we really should be looking at the performance of the asset, the potential for the performance of the asset. Placement is a big thing. People always talk about location, but you could be backing up. You could be in the best neighborhood in whatever city that you're in, but you're backing up to a turnpike when, if you're two turns into the neighborhood and you're backing up to the park or to the, community pool or something else, you'd be at a much better place in terms of, your geographic placement within the neighborhood. I think also a lot of investors, like you said earlier, they don't really think about the upfront cost, right? Yeah. They don't really think about, okay, so it's $30,000 to furnish the house. It's ongoing utilities, $400 to $600 a month, and water, electrical, gas, cable, internet. In terms of insurance, you have to add that into the policy.
But also they probably levered their initial investment. Now they've got to come out of pocket $30,000 cash. I doubt. I mean, Hannah, I don't know if you see differently, but I would figure that people are not generally rolling in the furnishings budget into their initial mortgage. I don't think a conventional lender would do it.
No.
A conventional lender would probably not do it, and if you're on a 5-year fixed and you're coming up on that period, then now you're refinancing at a much higher rate. And you're going to have to command higher nightly rates. The CEO of Airbnb just came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago, saying he was saying hosts need to reduce the nightly cost of Airbnbs. The reason is because guests are coming in and they're expecting a certain level of experience. If they can just go to a hotel and get a similar experience for 30% less, then why wouldn't they? If it's in a better location, closer to what they're trying to go visit, closer to the area that they want to be in, I would say that Airbnb nowadays may be a little overpriced, and guests are starting to notice it.
Well, the
I'm a
fees
big
the fees are pretty tremendous. I mean,
The
not
fees are
only are they
tremendous.
taking fees from the investor side, right, from Hannah's side here, but they're also, as the booker, you're also paying a substantial fee. They're taking a huge spread in the middle. Hannah, I know you don't generally, or maybe at all, use Airbnb. You don't use the platforms, right? Everything is booked directly through you.
I'm listed on there, but I try to avoid bookings on there like the plague.
Yeah. Interesting.
I would rather have everything direct. I don't want platform bookings if I can avoid it.
Two issues that I've seen come up, one during COVID when there were massive cancellations of booking. Airbnb, in a dramatic fashion, took the side of the guest rather than the host, and they overrode, I guess, all of the cancellation policies of the listings and gave all the people their money back. So now you are, even though you had a mortgage payment and the fact that you had purchased a house and taken all of Brian Chesky's advice to go get a new property to put on Airbnb, you were stuck paying your mortgage with a bunch of empty bookings, essentially. And the second thing that I've seen is that Airbnb will so often side with the guest when there are reports of damage from the host side. And can you talk to us a little bit about any experiences you've had where something has been broken? You said nothing's been broken, so maybe you don't have any experience, but some of your friends or anybody else that you've read, anything you've read on the internet where they've been like, hey, this thing broke, and Airbnb said, no, sorry, it's not the guest's fault. This was done previously, or whatever it would be.
Yeah, I haven't had anything major as far as breaks inside of any of my properties, but I've definitely had house rules broken and had to go through the platform process to get Airbnb a verbo to actually pay out those things. It's why I don't love platform bookings. I had a party thrown in one of my largest properties that I manage, and they had smoked marijuana all throughout it. And there was cigar smoke and stains, and there were a few burns on a couple of throw pillows, but those were minor. That in my house rules and what this guest had fully agreed to was very clear that they owed me a certain amount for a fee that was disclosed. They had signed the rental agreement and they had agreed to that process. I had to fight the platform to get payment for that and send all of the proof that they already had in front of them. It's just that side of annoyance. And what ultimately happened was the guest who stayed there didn't actually book through the actual property. It was her husband. And so that's how the platform was able to say, oh, well, actually, she didn't stay there, so you're out your luck. And I was able to throw their policy right back in their face and say, no, you had a very clear process to host and an agreement that the actual individual booking and making the booking would be the one staying there. So I was able to win because I knew the policies on both sides. But that's just kind of one of those aspects that you have to be aware of. It's not fun going through those processes. And it's why I take out an insurance policy on every single guest who stays at a property of mine, because that pays me out way faster than a platform ever will.
Wow.
And that kind of very in-depth level of involvement on the manager's side is what commands the 20 to 30% management fee that people have to pay for managing short-term rentals, because it's just so involved on the day-to-day communication wise. Matt, your experience is that, inevitably on a Friday night at 10 p.m., you're going to get that, text message of, oh, I can't get into my apartment or to my unit or to my Airbnb because, someone's drunk and they're not paying attention or reading the instructions. It's a nuisance. And that's why people outsource the management, but they have to pay a higher fee for that.
It's a nuisance, and you're so beholden to and scared of that rating drop that you don't want to tell them, hey, the rules that you agreed to stipulate that you will check in between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. And now it's 11 o'clock and you're trying to get in and you forget that you haven't watched the instructional video I sent or read the instructions, but you're trying to get in at 11 o'clock and you're disrupting my sleep. And by the way, I've got a new child at home, et cetera, but I guess I'll bend over backwards, capitulate, and let you in, or give you a code to a lockbox that's sitting out there, that's ancillary to the code that gets you in the door, or come do this personally because you're really, really dumb. It's just so annoying. I mean, Hannah, I respect you for doing it and the patience that you've got, but it was not for me.
And becoming a super host or getting, really good reviews is, in fact, not that difficult, I would say, because we've seen instances where people will drop the nightly rate to nothing, basically, have a friend book it, right? Then it's a confirmed reservation. Then they go in and they review your Airbnb. You get a 5-star review on everything. And those reviews are inflated and not, in fact, always true.
Yoni, it sounds like you've done this. This seems to have come
Never
from
done this.
experience.
I've seen it happen.
A friend of a friend.
A friend of a friend.
I mean, one of the things we're talking about is really the Achilles heel of a lot of these tech platforms. We're seeing the same thing with Uber, right? And that's well publicized, is they really are at the mercy of reviews from users, and they're dependent on new users adopting the platform for growth. So they allow a supply surplus on the house side in the Airbnb models or in the car driver side, but they're actually really not managing anything. They're just enabling a transaction. And so I think that's the mistake a lot of people make when they think, well, I'm going to put this on Airbnb and I'm just going to make money. There's actually a management piece, unless you have somebody, like a trusted partner, like a Hannah doing it for you, because all you're doing with Airbnb is you're facilitating a transaction and they're finding a buyer for your night. And so I think that's the problems as these platforms mature and the fee creep we just talked about starts to come in. People start realizing and start running into these problems, multiple bookings at a place, or this isn't really as advertised, right? Because there's no way in the world Airbnb can control the quality of their bookings, just like Uber can control the quality of their drivers. And so I think we're just seeing kind of a maturation point, a bit of a tipping point happen in that short-term market. And I do think some investors are going to have to start looking at balancing their portfolio a little bit better. Short-term could still be a great moneymaker if you've got the right location and you got the right mix, or maybe you have a second property that you only use a particular amount of time. And so that is a great thing to be able to share. But I think ultimately we're returning to real estate being more of a longer-term value play. And I think some of these investors are going to have to start looking at some of these other properties that aren't making it in the short-term market as something probably need to start addressing the long-term market, because where you have a higher need at the moment.
I mean, Yoni, you mentioned that part of the increased intensity in management and cost goes to having people like Hannah do the management. I would argue that the vast majority of people managing short-term rentals are not as diligent and prudent as Hannah. Like we weren't taking out an individual insurance policy when I was doing 5, and it was a side hustle because we had some clients that really wanted us to do it. And we had a bunch of cool systems and software, and we were also very automated. So we had invested in the technology, but we weren't nearly as professional as Hannah is on all the things she's discussed. So I think 2 considerations. One is that your risk is greater unless you have somebody that really is doing a phenomenal job. And 2, the intensity of ownership is also more, because it doesn't matter whether Hannah or your property manager is caring for 70, 80, 90%. You're still going to be way more involved because you are thinking, one, is there going to be enough money coming in this month for me to cover my mortgage? So you're thinking about it more frequently. Long-term rentals, you're going to think about it much less frequently. Number 2, you're going to have greater intensity of issues. So again, it's the HVAC going out has to be addressed today, or we're getting space heaters. The stove is more likely to break because of repeated use. Maybe that's kind of a silly argument, but like just generally more intensive things are going to break. Your furnishings, your covering. So you're going to have, even if the manager's handling the vast majority of the stuff, you're still having more frequent conversations with somebody about something. And for people that are just set it and forget it types, they want to hire a management company. They want to not be bothered with it. And I think we talk about this a lot internally at Keyrenter because we always try to improve our communications, and we're so focused on the business of management, the process and business of management, that we forget that many of our owners are like, guys, I don't even want to know your names. Don't call me unless there's something emergent. Don't call me unless you're planning on not sending me any money. But in an ideal world, you guys send me the rent check every month, direct deposit in my account. I'm going to assume it's there. I don't even generally look. I'm going to assume it's there. And I'm not going to look at my owner statement or anything else. You are not the center of my universe. I understand that you're the center of yours. So it just depends. I mean, we spoke a little bit about strategy and objectives. Like, it depends what you want as an owner of real estate investment. If you love the asset class because you generally believe that you can lever your money, take $4 of the banks for every dollar of yours, and that real estate appreciates over time because, as the old adage goes, land, they're not making more of it. And you're in an environment, in a geography where there's population growth and business development and growth, then you might want to just be hands off and take the asset class for what it is and hold it for 25 years and not be involved. If you are in a cash flow game where you really want cash flow every month and you want it to be, you're willing to stomach the ride, you may be willing to do short-term rental. The other thing that's really interesting, Yoni, that you and I learned the other day is for investors that want to take advantage of active depreciation against their active gains, their active salary. So for example, you're a doctor and you don't have you make $400,000 a year and you want to take advantage of depreciation, but you cannot do it if you're purely passive because you don't have $50,000 of passive gains from stock market, appreciation or sale of stock market of stocks. Then you can actually do the short-term rental game for a year. You can take advantage of some of that bonus depreciation, and then you can transition it back into a long-term rental. The question then becomes, what do I do with all that furniture, right? What do I do with so maybe you go to rent a center, you do it, for a little bit. You're not going to have super nice stuff. It's going to be cheap,
That's where if you're compromising the quality, then you're going to be ultimately feeling it on your net operating income. If you want to operate an Airbnb, my argument is that you have to do it right. You can't just throw together a bunch of furniture from Rent a Center or Overstock.com and expect the performance of your Airbnb to be at the high level of furnishing it from West Elm or Fabrica or whatever. It has to be done right. It has to be done to a certain level. Guests will have expectations, and if they see that you're compromising on the quality, then you're going to get that bad review, or they're going to end up noticing it in the photos, noticing it in the listing, noticing it in the reviews that have been left by other guests, and ultimately opt to go to a hotel where they know exactly what they're going to receive, and it's a consistent level of service, it's a consistent level of quality, and they don't have to worry about is something going to break? Are they going to blame me? Will someone come out and fix it? I mean, just my last experience booking an Airbnb for almost just about a month in Wichita, the furnace went out 4 times, and she kept sending out an HVAC guy to come out and fix it. I ended up kind of just befriending this person and getting his phone number because I thought, well, if you're a licensed HVAC guy, maybe Keyrenter could also throw you some work and hire you as a contractor. Turns out he wasn't really a licensed HVAC contractor.
No way.
He was using someone to just come out and almost like pretend to fix the problem. And it happened 4 times. And ultimately, I did write a review, and I mentioned that she needs to find licensed contractors to do the work so that she can fix it once, fix it for good,
right?
Not have to come, because that's going to erode your profits every time you send out someone.
Yeah, she's still paying for it, presumably.
Yep.
Crazy. Let's talk about transitioning. This is Hannah. And Steve, you've seen a number of these leads come in also. We're seeing it more and more, transitioning from unsuccessful, most likely short-term rentals to long-term rentals. What does an investor need to consider, Hannah, when making the transition?
We have to weigh that cost of what their mortgage is or what their monthly bottom line is and see if we can actually match that in a long-term realm. And I think sometimes a lot of what I have experienced with the leads that have come my way, and just realizing that we're not going to be able to hit their bottom line simply because their interest rate was too high. They bought it not maybe the ideal time, but they were purchasing it for that strategy of STR and then didn't have the performance to back it up. In it, and it really comes down to talking through, like, we might be at a loss, but this long-term will create stability. Maybe this first year we're at a loss, but when the interest rates begin to come down, we can explore those refinancing options. When we get to a point of renewing, then we can increase that rental rate and we can continue to get you towards that line. And just really setting that expectation of, the reality is in your short-term realm for the past 8 months, you've only had 7 bookings. And so we're going to be able to get you more monthly income on a consistent and very regular basis for you.
It might
and I
not be
think
as much as you want, but it will be consistent
Right.
and it'll be a known entity. So if you need to bring $400 a month to the table to cover your mortgage and interest and your PITI taxes and insurance, then at least you know that you can save for it, as opposed to being caught off guard and you get a whole month of no bookings, right?
Right. I also think that people in the STR to LT switch are forgetting that their insurance policies change drastically. And that when you're switching
Right.
from an STR and all of those added liabilities, that insurance policy is going to go down. So just always being very clear of make sure you're talking to those people. And then that their cost of utilities also goes off of their bottom line in their consideration. Because I think their mindset has been on, I have to make $3,200 per month to cover everything. Well, now we're taking the cost of utilities out. We're taking that internet out. We're reducing that insurance rate potentially in all of those aspects. So it can just really help to alleviate too of it's not that $3,200 mark. In reality, it's closer to that actual mortgage and insurance. And that's all you really need to worry of or considering your bottom line.
Steve, what do you think?
I think a lot of people immediately think about the furniture and what am I going to do with all the furniture? In the reality, I think what Hannah just mentioned is a lot more important. What are your true costs? And then the other thing I think to pay attention to is seasonality, right? What market are you in? When are these, down troughs you're experiencing? Our job as trusted advisors would be to talk about when is the highest and most likely times for an LTR to get a good tenant in there, and try to make sure that gap is bridged, so to speak. I do think midterm rentals, for example, are interesting. Where Heather has mentioned before, like traveling nurses and other stuff. Maybe they can, start. It just depends if their bookings have really fallen through the floor. And if you look at the Reddit Airbnb bus thread, that has happened to a lot of people on Airbnb. They're just bookings have disappeared. That may be a different situation to triage, but ultimately we'd want to try to balance the blow of the switch, because the sheer reality is there's going to be a month or two of switching over that they're going to have to financially navigate through.
The other thing is and I don't know if you guys have seen this or if I'm just totally making this up. We definitely see it in long-term rentals where owners try to do the management themselves. They flow right through peak leasing season. And then come October, November, they bring it to us and go, I wasn't able to do it. Can you do it? And I'm like, look, we had 50 applications per week last month. And now we have 5 applications per week because there's a seasonality. There's a very seasonal period of leasing. And in South Florida, that might be all year. And in South Florida, that might be winter. But in our markets, it is not winter. So if you bring me a property in October and I get it rent ready and listed, around Halloween, we're not going to have very much success. And until February, things don't really start picking up again. So if you squander your months of short-term rental attempts and then decide in October that you want to make the switch, it's a bad time. Do it, bring it to any manager, whether us or doing it yourself or any other manager in peak leasing season. Make the decision in March so that you have a full 3 or 4 months of leasing potential to get top dollar for your long-term rental, instead of suffering foolishly through all the terrible months of short-term rental, assuming that you're not doing 7 times your mortgage in one weekend, suffering through that slog, and then bringing it to a manager trying to lease it long-term in November. It's not a good look. And we can't really help. Anything that we can do to help drive demand.
Yeah. Also making sure that you're keeping your hand on the pulse of the market and looking at those average days on market for, whatever type of asset class you own, 3-bedroom homes, 4-bedroom homes, a small apartment complex, making sure that, you're aligning your expectations with what is truly going on in the market. And if you ever have questions about those, I guess if anyone ever has questions in the viewership or audience, feel free to go to any of our social media pages, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram, and soon also to be on our website and check out those market summaries so that you can see what those average days on market are and, what those mean for landlords and tenants, right? We know that when inventory turns over, very rapidly, and it creates good opportunity for landlords, but when things kind of slow down, you have to place your rental in a more competitive landscape, and maybe price it a nickel below what the market can sustain, so that you can find a good tenant, find someone who stays long-term, sign an 18-month lease, sign a 6-month lease, have that lease expire on, a more favorable leasing cycle, and, operate with that in mind. Yeah.
Right. Hannah Shelburne, Steve Howard, Yoni, Schmidt, thank you for being on the show today. Talk about short-term rentals, the benefits, the drawbacks, and then potential transition to long-term rentals. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Same Day Podcast. Tune in to a new show each week and be sure to subscribe to get future episodes.